the CPU wars have begun. Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. Ryzen 7000 has finally launched, but here comes Intel's 13th generation Raptor Lake CPUs hot on their heels. Should you rush out and buy those new CPUs, or are Ryzen 5000 and 12th generation Intel CPUs just way better value right now? In our first CPU market update, we'll take you through everything that you need to know to get the best CPU for you. If you get value out of the video, give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel, especially this guy right here. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. With that, let's jump into it. Before that, this video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows 10 licenses and that terrible Activate Windows 10 watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key, and get a Windows 10 Home or Pro OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 25% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom, you have a fully licensed Windows 10 for a crazy low price, which can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. Use the links in the video description below. All right, let's jump into pricing. As we do with our GPU market update, we're going to take a look at the cost of the CPUs. Let's take a look and dive in. Ryzen 5600 down to $159. That's really good. 5600X still around $194. We've got the Ryzen 5700X if you're thinking about more CPU power there for $228. Actually really good price. And then we've got like the 5800X 3D, $399. And I can't wait till we get to the whole platform cost because you're going to see what a beast that thing actually is. Then of course we've got the 5900X 368 and the 5950X all the way down to $549. Of course we've got the new Ryzen 7000 CPUs as well. 7600X $299, 7700X $100 more. Actually, I'll tell you, the difference between those makes a lot more sense than the 5600X and the 5800X when they first came out, because it's basically priced per core, which is really nice. 7900X, $549, and big discount on the 7950X at $699. If you look at the MSRP of the 5950X, which was $750 MSRP basically, and I think you're going to be very surprised, despite the cost of that CPU and the cost of the platform, how good it is at price to performance for production systems. Let's jump over to the Intel side. You'll notice that I haven't done any 10th or 11th gen. That's for good reason, because we're about to add 13th gen to this. So let me know down in the comments, are there any particular 10th or 11th gen CPUs that you think merit kind of bringing to this list? The one I think makes a lot of sense maybe is the i3-10100F, but that's something we can develop over time. Let's punch through the pricing. i3-12100F, just a ridiculously low $107. i3-12100, you know, $130. I don't think anyone's buying that CPU. Then we've got the 12400F, $175. Actually more expensive than the 5600. And then we've got the 12600K, back up to $277. That's not a great price for it. That being said, the i7-12700F back down to $315, the 12700KF and K around $399, $400, and then we've got the i9-12900K and the KF sitting right around that $560 to $580 price point. So let's talk about why CPU prices are where they are and where they're going. Obviously this week the big news was that Ryzen 7000 launched. 7950X absolutely crushed the 12900K. In our Ryzen 7900X build and review video, we showed that it also crushed the 12900K. Not good news for 12th gen Intel. Now, big questions around the cost of the memory, the cost of the platform, but overall, in terms of performance, Ryzen really delivered. Of course, Ryzen isn't the only news. On the day that Ryzen launched, literally September 27th, Intel made its huge announcement that it is also launching 13th Gen Raptor Lake, and you could pre-order them on that date. Let's quickly go through what all this is, because there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, these are going to be the unlocked parts. These are going to be the K SKUs that you can overclock with a Z690 or Z790 motherboard. You will be able to use Z690 on these, which is great. Let's go through the pricing and then we'll talk about specs a little bit. The pricing Intel showed, just FYI, that was RCP. That's what they sell directly at volume to retailers, not what consumer pricing is. So these are actual consumer prices at Newegg right now. $329 for the 13600K, $449 for the 13700K, and $659 for the 13900K. What is the big difference between these and 12th gen? That's probably what you're wondering. The biggest difference is that they are doubling the amount of E-cores. Remember, Intel's CPUs, they now have performance cores, big cores, and littler cores that are efficiency cores that are just single threaded. The big cores are hyper threaded. That means they have 2 threads to them. 8 E cores on the 13600K instead of 4. You're going to get 8 on the 13700K instead of 4, and you're going to get 16 E-cores instead of 8 on the 13900K. In terms of what difference that's going to make, let's talk a little bit about their performance claims. Now, I will be the first to tell you, I would take anything Intel says, first-party numbers, with a huge grain of salt. So these numbers here, to me, probably represent a very optimistic best case scenario for Intel. So just know that Intel has often bent the truth in its numbers. They're probably the worst of the three big ones, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, out there in terms of doing that. And I'll give you another example how they did it with this one too. That being said, it's possible that 13th gen Intel will beat Ryzen 7000 in certain workloads. So I would wait until we see testing information from reputable third-party review sites. They're claiming a 15% uplift in terms of single thread performance. That's primarily because they're going to pump way more power into these things and they're going to crank up the clock speeds. We're not seeing an IPC, instructions per clock, increase in these CPUs. We're primarily seeing this through frequency and then a little bit in terms of better memory tuning and then a little bit better cache on the CPU themselves. 41% is what they're claiming in terms of multi-threaded. Now they're saying that because there's more threads, because there's more E-cores basically, more frequency, they're cranking up the CPU frequency through more power, and then of course cache and memory. Now, the reason I wouldn't take these numbers to the bank until we actually see reputable third parties, Intel's just great about always giving examples why we shouldn't trust their numbers. For instance, they say, oh, leadership gaming performance. Let's look at this. Oh, look, we beat in World of Warcraft and Mount Blade and all these Counter-Strike. We are beating the pants off of the 5950X. Oh, what's this little line? What's that little line right there? Oh, that's the 5800X 3D. So actually, if you had another bar graph on here, that bar would go all the way up here and you'd be losing to it. You wouldn't be 6% ahead. You would actually be behind. And they did that across the board. So don't ever take Intel's word for anything. Not to say that they won't make a good product, but just don't take their performance numbers worth anything. Let's see what they have in terms of actual third-party tested numbers once the CPUs release. Let's briefly go through now something that I keep saying, which is that Ryzen 7000 is not selling well. I'm using air quotes here because this is what other people are saying. It's not selling well, and we should expect price cuts on Ryzen 7000 coming soon. And certainly, I think that Ryzen 7000 is far more expensive than Ryzen 5000. Obviously, you got to buy a brand new motherboard. You got to buy brand new DDR5 memory that's still sky high in price. So yes, there's a big gulf there. And it's not like you already own an AM4 mother or AM5 motherboard where you're just going to drop that right in like happened with Ryzen 5000. But people are saying, look at this. They're all available at Newegg. Ryzen 5000 was sold out and was sold out for literal months. The other thing they're pointing to is that we didn't have the big lines at Micro Center. This is from the Ryzen 5000 launch, and I'll just show you a couple more pictures here. You know, all these people camping out the night before. Look at the line all the way down the block here for Ryzen 5000, and then here's another picture at another Micro Center for Ryzen 5000. So there's certainly no denying that there's less interest in Ryzen 7000 than there was than Ryzen 5000 if you're just talking about the number of people who are willing to line up outside of a Micro Center for it. Absolutely. How is it selling? Well, I don't know. So we had some early data shared with us from Mind Factory in Germany by Tech Epiphany, and they're saying that that data is as expected. Though I will note the 7600X only selling 50 units against 200 units for the 7700X and about 200 units for the 7900X and over 200 units for the other one. That shows to me some potential weakness for Ryzen 7000, which is they have moved away from the low end or the value gamer. And I think that people are feeling that. DDR5 memory is very expensive with Expo right now. You know, the X670 motherboards seem very expensive. We don't have B650 yet. It's coming. And the 7600X coming in at $299 again. You know, all that pinches people for sure, especially that's the audience who would normally reach out and grab that 6-core 12-thread CPU. So yes, I do think that in some ways it's to be expected. People had to buy a PC in order to work from home. We're no longer in a silicon shortage, so maybe AMD has shipped a lot more units in now than they could ship previously. I don't know, but I wouldn't be banking on price cuts. I wouldn't be waiting for price cuts necessarily. I'd be waiting for something, like 13th gen Raptor Lake to arrive to understand the differences between them. But I wouldn't really be banking on like that they're going to discount the 7600X by $25 or $30. So how do we get to the best gaming CPU in October and the best production CPUs in October based on performance and price? Well, here's how you do it. We start with this massive spreadsheet. We are not going to spend a lot of time going through this spreadsheet. I just want to quickly explain how it works. But if you want to play around with it, it will be linked down in the video description so you can check it out. Really quickly, we've got the CPU brands, Intel and Ryzen. That makes sense, right? We've got all the CPUs here. Note that we're tracking 32 different configurations, K SKU CPUs, that's the 12600K, etc. We are looking at both DDR4 and DDR5 because you get different gaming performance depending on what memory you're using, especially now that faster DDR5 is available at a somewhat cheaper price. We take a look at the multi-core score, that's Cinebench R23. That'll help us understand what this CPUs can do in terms of production. And then we take a look at the gaming score, and the gaming score is pulled from a compilation of relatively recent reviews with like an RTX 3090 Ti or an RX 6950 XT. And I've worked really hard to kind of scale all those reviews to give you a general idea of where these CPUs rank amongst themselves. We then come up with a RAM, board chipset, and cooler, and you come up with a total platform gaming cost here and a total production cost. The production cost is just basically 32 gigabytes or more of memory. The gaming cost just includes 16 gigabytes of memory. And then we come up with a price to performance, both for gaming and for production, and that's what we're going to use based on that to determine our best CPUs. Do note that both the gaming and the multi-core scores are anchored to the 12100F. We've used that as a baseline, so everything over that is basically a percentage faster than the 12100F. And here's the overall platform cost. If you want to take a look again, this tab is also in the spreadsheet. You'll be available to you. Well, let's jump into the best budget gaming CPUs in October. And this is where the total platform price is $400 or less. And that includes the cooler, that includes the RAM, and that includes the motherboard. So obviously i3 12100F really tough to beat. $107 cost for the CPU using the stock cooler, a cheap H610 or B660 motherboard, budget DDR4 memory, $252 overall gaming cost, and a price to performance in terms of gaming of $2.52. It kind of just blows everything else out of the water. If you do want to come up in terms of performance, the next stop I would make is the Ryzen 5 5600, which along with the cheaper motherboard prices, the 5600 is just cheaper than like the 12400F. You get a total cost of $314. You come up, about what, 12-ish% in terms of performance. That's with a high-end GPU, of course. The next stop I would make here, possibly the Ryzen 5600X, because again, we get more performance out of that in that gaming score there of 120, and we're not spending that much more money at $349 for the total platform price, or $2.92 gaming price to performance. Jumping over to the best mid-range gaming CPUs, and this is where the gaming score is 120 or greater, but the total system price we're going to cap at $650. That includes the motherboard, the cooler, as well as the RAM. You can see the Ryzen CPUs kind of clean up here. 5600X, 5700X, 5800X. This is the long-standing platform advantage that Ryzen has had with the B550 much cheaper motherboards. Meanwhile, some of those B660 motherboards and Z690 motherboards significantly more expensive, especially if you're going to go with the i7 12700F. Now, on the i7, I've put more premium memory. If you want to get in here and if you want to change these assumptions, you certainly can. It doesn't make that much of a difference in the end. That being said, if you want the absolute highest performance and not spending much more money, you can certainly look at the i7 12700F. Let's punch through mid-range production before we get to high-end production and high-end performance gaming. We've got the Ryzen 7 5700G at the top of this chart. How is that possible? Because it's using a B450 motherboard. Remember, 5700G does not have PCIe Gen 4. No reason to get a more expensive B550 motherboard. However, if your production process requires Gen 4, then go ahead and throw this one out. And I would then anoint the i7 12700F as the place to be, with premium DDR4, a quality B660 motherboard, and the stock cooler. You can, of course, replace the cooler, but honestly, $2.61, that's really hard to beat. We do have the Ryzen 7 5700X coming in pretty close to that, but remember, less performance in terms of multi-core. So if you're looking for that kind of performance, 12700F seems like the place to be. And of course, kind of jumping right in the middle here. Now, I don't know, this might be over your budget, but the Ryzen 9 7950X is an absolute beast and begins to justify its much higher cost in terms of platform cost, $2.74. That's really tough to beat, especially since it absolutely nukes anything else on this chart. Jumping over to high performance production systems. So this is where the multi-core score is 275 or greater. And look at that Ryzen 9 7950X go. It's absolutely destroying everything else in price to performance, not just raw performance, but price to performance. And it's having to use a more expensive X670 motherboard, more expensive DDR5 memory, more expensive performance AIO cooler. That's a 280 millimeter or 360 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler. And yes, the cost of the system as spec'd out here, $1,313 for that platform, the highest on the chart, but that multi-core score of 480 is what is absolutely destroying everything else, including the 5950X and including the 12900K, which ends up at the bottom of this chart. Now listen, we'll see next month. Can the 13900K unseated? I seriously doubt it's going to come anywhere close in terms of multi-core performance, but we'll see. Here we are. This is probably what everybody's been waiting for, the best high-performance gaming CPU. This is with a gaming score of 135 or greater. Now, before we punch into the results, I just want to note that we are getting faster GPUs, and as we stated in our Ryzen 7900X review, it's very likely that the Ryzen 7000 and even the 5800X 3D, possibly the 12900K, are being bottlenecked right now. They're GPU bound in so many of these tests, it's actually skewing the results. So once we get that RTX 4090, we'll see how this changes around. But at least right now, the 5800X 3D absolutely wrecking everything else in terms of price to performance for gaming. So we go from $4.99 price to performance all the way up to $5.90. That's like 20% more expensive for the Ryzen 5 7600X. Now, some of this will change. For instance, right now there are no 16 gigabyte kits of DDR5 memory that have expo timings that I can find anywhere online. So we're actually using a 32 gigabyte kit here versus the 16 gigabyte kit for the 5800X and all the other DDR4 platforms. Also interesting to note that we're going to get B650 motherboards that should significantly cut down the motherboard price. So I expect the Ryzen 5 7600X this time next month to be significantly better in terms of price to performance. Right now it's just being hamstrung by no availability of B650 motherboards and low availability or no availability of cheaper DDR5 kits that are also 6000 speed. But as we go down the list, now listen, if you also want a system that does a lot of production, like a hybrid system, yes, then maybe the i7 12700KF makes a lot more sense, especially with DDR5 memory there. 12700 if you're doing video editing, obviously with that iGPU. But if you're just looking for gaming performance and you wanted today to put together the best price to performance high-end system, the 5800X 3D makes a ton of sense, especially if you already own an AM4 motherboard where you could just slot in a 5800X 3D. Of course, we'll see next month when we add 13th gen Intel to this, when we've got the new B650 motherboards in there, when we've got cheaper DDR5 prices, and we've got faster GPUs, how all this shakes out. But at least today, the 5800X 3D is kicking everyone's butt. Let's play everyone's favorite game. Should you buy now or should you wait? Well, honestly, it's very, very polarized right now. If you're at the budget level or you're kind of at the mid-range, right, where you're going to get a 3000 series graphics card or you're going to get an AMD 6000 series graphics card, or you're going to dig through the huge volume of GPUs that are being sold off by GPU miners right now, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense to wait. Raptor Lake is not going to bring you anything new on the CPU front. We're talking about 13600K and higher. I would go ahead and go with an existing Ryzen CPU, or if you're at the ultra budget level, the i3 12100F looks really good, and just invest the rest of your money into buying the biggest and fastest graphics card you can. That would make the most sense. You know, maybe a 5700X might make some sense. Maybe an i5 12600K might make some sense, but I would try and keep that CPU down. 5600X, if you want a little bit more performance and you want to spend a little bit more money, but otherwise invest all that money in your GPU. On the other hand, if you were at the high end or even the middle part of the high end up to the highest tier, and you're waiting because you're going to go out and get an RTX 4080, 4080 16GB, 4090, or you're waiting for AMD to launch their Radeon RX 7000 series GPUs, they're going to announce on November 3rd, then obviously you're waiting until at least November 3rd. And on November 3rd, we're going to have a couple things. One is we'll know exactly what AMD is launching. We'll have a rough idea of the performance figures for it. We'll also know when they are actually coming to market. I would anticipate they're going to be coming before Black Friday begins. I just feel like AMD is probably going to want to get these things out ASAP. And at the same time, we're going to know Raptor Lake performance. We're going to know Raptor Lake performance with faster graphics cards as well. And we'll have Ryzen 7000 with faster graphics cards and the 5800X 3D with faster graphics cards. So we'll have a much more understandable playing field. So that's what I would look to do if you're at the high end. You're really just waiting until probably November 4th, November 5th to see how everything is going to shake out. If you got value out of the video, remember to give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. And we've got a lot of cool content coming. One piece of content you might be really interested in is checking out our best CPU and GPU combo video. We go through how to understand how to build the best CPU and GPU combo depending on gaming or production work and getting the right one for you. And we'll catch you on the next one.